Welcome to Clotheshorse, the podcast that, well, this podcast had a runaway cow in the yard this weekend, and it was pretty hilarious. I'm going to try to tell you this story really fast, but I've been laughing about it for the past few days. I was upstairs in the bedroom folding some laundry, and I was like, wow, it really sounds like the cows across the road are like right here. One of them is being so loud right now. And I looked out the window, and there was the larger cow, whose name I have come to learn is Coco. And Coco is a very big boy. Coco was in the yard, just hanging out, kind of eating weeds, really, he cleaned all the weeds up around the mailbox. So I'm not upset that he was over here. And I was yelling, Dustin, there's a cow in the yard. But he thought I was saying towel and just, I guess, really freaking out about a towel being in the yard. I ran down. I'm like, no, there's a cow in the yard. And we ran out there, and there was Coco hanging out, eating lots of grass and whatnot. And just then, one of Coco's humans came up the road in her car. She was like, oh, Coco's been getting out a lot lately. He's been all over the place. I'm going to go get the golf cart and try to corral him back up into the barn, because they have a golf cart. And she went and got the golf cart and came over and was trying to reason with Coco, but he was sort of ignoring her. I mean, he was happy to see her, I could tell, but he was finding some really good grass to eat in our yard. And so then she had to call her husband, who I would say is like the primary caretaker of the cows. There's just two of them, Coco and Brownie, and they live across the road, and they're best friends. And as far as I can tell, they're just sort of like pets. And everybody in the neighborhood loves them because they come up to the fence and visit and let you pet them. And I give them carrots sometimes. And so she calls her husband because I guess he's a stronger relationship with the cows. And meanwhile, as we're waiting for him to come over, Brownie, Coco's best friend / roommate, is across the road just mooing up a storm because he's really upset that Coco's not with him. And I just couldn't stop laughing. It was so funny. And I'm trying not to laugh because I knew that his humans were really frustrated. So then the husband, he comes up on his four-wheeler, and he somehow is able to reason with Coco and get Coco to follow him up to the barn. And Coco was like practically skipping up there, like he was so excited. But then when he went back inside, he got fed. Then he continued to moo all night long because I think he wanted to come back outside. He really enjoyed his time on the lamb. Anyway, that was the world's longest introduction. I'm your host, Amanda, and this is episode 202. And I'm so excited right now, not just because I had a cow in my yard, but I'm also really excited about this week's guest, artist, designer, sewist, and small business owner, Janelle Abbott. Today we'll be talking about, among many other things, her recent performance, 14 Hours, in which Janelle spent 6 days sewing for 14 hours each day, demonstrating the lived experience of a Bangladeshi garment worker. We'll also be talking about upcycling as a necessity for a better future, what is, in quotes, sustainable when you're an artist and a maker within the slow fashion realm, and how we can get others to be sort of, activated by better understanding the lives of garment workers. And that's just a little bit of what we're going to be talking about. In fact, I'm going to tell you, this episode is long. And we talked much longer than this episode actually is. I cut some things out, but there was nothing else I wanted to cut, despite going back and forth on things, because I just think this conversation is so thoughtful, so inspiring, so interesting. I didn't want to take any more out of it. And so I'm not going to be doing much of an intro or outro for this episode. And while this one is over 2 hours, there will not be an episode next week in honor of Dustin Travis White's birthday, because I'm hoping to do something fun with him on Sunday. That's his actual birthday, and that's normally when I would be working on finalizing that week's episode. But I guess what I'm saying is this is a long episode, but you have 2 weeks to listen to it. Although I personally, if I heard this, would binge it all at once because it's a really interesting conversation. Not to brag or anything. It's really Janelle that brings the interesting part of it. Before I jump into this episode, I do want to remind you that tickets for the Clotheshorse Jamboree are on sale now. It's happening August 16th and 17th here in Lancaster, PA, where cows just come into your yard. Although we'll be doing this, what I call in town, at the Candy Factory, which is the co-working space / community / really cool building in town where we are going to have the 6th floor and we're going to do all kinds of cool stuff. In fact, what will we be doing at the Jamboree? Well, on day 1, we're going to get started with a workshop called How to Be a Better Thrifter. I'm going to tell you how to secondhand shop like a pro, including measurements, strategy, best practices, all kinds of stuff. We're also going to talk about mindful rehoming and how to make the best impact with your unwanted stuff. And in general, we're going to talk about how to make the best choices when you're shopping for anything, sort of like the flow chart of decision making that I use. We're also going to do a workshop on the first day about how to understand your personal style, because embracing our personal style is a key part of the slow fashion way of life. And we're also going to talk about how to dismantle all of the rules about clothing that have been ingrained in us since childhood. We're going to make our own mood boards and collages out of magazines, fabric scraps, etc. And we're going to share our vision with others. I think that one's going to be really fun. We're also going to play a little game called Slow Fashion Trivia Bingo, aka Brenda, combining slow fashion trivia and information with bingo and fabulous prizes. And then we're going to wrap things up on that first day with a movie night and discussion hosted by Christine of Lady Hog Vintage. She's going to curate a film and lead our discussion. We're going to have popcorn, snacks, all the things. We're going to get back up on day 2, and we're going to get things started with another workshop about how to talk to others about slow fashion, why community matters. You know, this is something I have learned over the past 4 years working on Clotheshorse. And I'm going to share with you what I've learned and how we can do it better. We're also going to talk about some of the most common sort of like excuses, defenses of fast fashion, and how to have productive conversations even when someone shows up with those excuses. Then we're going to take a group walk around downtown Lancaster, including to the Central Market, which is the oldest publicly owned, continuously running farmers market in America, established in 1730. It's also full of delicious food, coffee, flowers, gifts, a great place to get yourself some Lancaster County souvenirs or scope out some really exquisite produce or get a special snack. And as we're doing that little walk, you're going to get to see all the amazing vintage stores and boutiques that are in that area. We have so many great small businesses in downtown Lancaster. We're going to come back. We're going to be all refreshed and inspired from our time out in the world. And we're going to do the ultimate upcycled craft challenge. Picture it. Sicily. No, picture it. A table covered with secondhand craft supplies, paper goods, and other treasures. Now, picture that, right? Pretty exciting. I got excited. We're going to make something cool or weird or random with this stuff. And I'm going to hand out prizes based on my favorite, or I don't know, just categories I'm going to make up on the spot. And then that evening, we're going to have a live before a studio audience. That's you episode of Clotheshorse. This is going to be the first ever episode of Clotheshorse recorded in front of a live studio audience. At that live episode, you're going to have the opportunity to buy and create your own upcycled Clotheshorse merch at the merch table. And there will be a cash bar happy hour before the episode. And I'm really pleased to say that event will be held at West Arts in Lancaster, which is this incredible venue. It's a huge church. Two really cool guys have been turning it into a venue and community space. They're adding a cafe. It feels like such a magical space when you go in there. Not only is it beautiful because it is an old church, but there's also just this like energy of people. I don't know. It's like people wanting to build something for their community and do something amazing that involves their community. So I'm really excited that we're going to be holding that at West Arts. So here's the deal with tickets to the Jamboree. Right now, they cost $200. We still have some for sale, but They will be going up to $300 on Monday, June 10th. To lock in the $200 price, you can either buy your tickets ASAP, you can reach out to me to reserve a ticket and pay a $50 deposit, or reach out to me to set up a payment plan. Now, I can't do Afterpay or Klarna because those services only apply to like physical goods, not events. But what I can do is set up a payment plan for you where you will pay $50 now, $50 by the end of June, $50 by the end of July, and pay your last $50 when you show up to the Jamboree. If you want to do that, you have to reach out to me because I have to do like a workaround to be able to issue the ticket. I've already thought it through. I have a plan. I just need to get a bunch of information from you. So if that's something you're interested in, get to me ASAP so that we can ensure that you have a ticket. Okay, that's all I have to say about the Jamboree. If you have more questions, shoot me an email. Let's jump into my conversation with Janelle. Why don't you introduce yourself to everyone?
Styles to make clothing, furniture, soft sculpture, large scale paintings, all kinds of different works.
You do a lot of things.
So, yeah, there's a lot of fabric out there that needs resolution. And so I've found different avenues for repurposing clothing. And all my work is zero waste. And so I think that also exponentially means I'm making more and more work because I'm trying to resolve smaller and smaller pieces of material.
I like the way you refer to it as resolving and resolution. I asked people on Threads recently, like, what are we going to do with all of this extra fabric and fast fashion clothing that's just like piling up? Like, we have to come up with a use for this stuff because it's not going away. And so many people were just like, I don't want to be involved. Look, they were like, it's gross. I don't want to be a part of it.
Yeah, the material itself is sort of undesirable because it's polyester, or the garment itself is just like nasty baby's first corporate attire, you know? Like it's nothing that should have existed in the first place, or like out of date club apparel, or just like micro trends that didn't even have a moment really because it passed by so fast. And I feel like part of my practice is to intentionally seek out materials that are undesirable and they're doomed, like they have no hope. And so I'm trying to invest a lot of creative labor and like emotional energy into this material to validate its existence, because it's true that it's here. And there is, I feel some personal contention about the fact that yes, I do work with polyesters, and by using that and allowing it to exist in a realm where maybe it'll enter the wash cycle, if someone's wearing and washing it, like that does perpetuate an issue of microplastics. But I also just can't get past the fact that these things exist. Like there's no denying all this clothing, all these textiles, they exist. And so I feel like my role as an artist is to sort of be a firefighter. I'm just trying to put out the fires when and where I see them. I can't necessarily take the time to be the fire marshal or whoever investigates, like, who's this arson that's setting all these fires? Like, that's not my job. And I'm not going to be the policymaker who's saying, like, we need more rules about fire safety. I'm just here to solve a problem. And so that's really, it's a big part of the work that I do, is focusing on a resolution for an issue that I can't deny. It feels very prescient, and like everywhere I look, there's just orphaned clothing that needs a solution.
Yeah, I mean, it's true. It's sort of overwhelming, and I think, I mean, the solution is so complex, right? It's interesting because I do, like, on one hand, I recognize how complex it is and how to resolve it. We need policy. We need people working on finding resolution for these fabrics. Yes. And we also need to stop the flow of these fabrics. So it's just like multi-tiered. But so often I come across people saying sort of like, well, it's a problem too big, so I don't want to touch it. And these fabrics are gross and I don't want to waste my time on them. Or like, whatever, this is just how the world is now. And we have to accept that things suck. Like it's depressing, right? So how do you stay motivated to work on this when you realize like this is a hard problem?
Shein or Temu I'm not going to stop them in their tracks or like bring them to their knees as corporations. Like that's impossible. But I think what really keeps me motivated is the constant flow of materials. I'm routinely riding my bike down the street and finding a free box full of bed sheets and t-shirts, or having someone reach out to me saying, hey, I'm moving and I don't want to donate my clothes. Would you like to take them? And in the past, I've been like, send me some pictures. Let me see what you got. And they'll send me pictures and I'm like, this stuff is garbage. I don't want any of it. And then I'll message them back and I'll be like, I'll take it all. So I routinely put myself in situations where I'm responsible for something that isn't originally my responsibility, but that's what keeps me creatively motivated to continue working, is just constantly having new materials to resolve and remaining willing to resolve other people's problems.
You're also an artist. And I think that is a really important piece of this equation, that of course there are companies out there, not enough of them, trying to find a use for these fabrics, trying to, develop the technology for recycling, and there are policymakers out there trying to, build policy around corporate responsibility for these textiles. But like, you're literally there turning them into something that in theory would be like enriching the world, which is interesting because these are fabrics that no one wants.
To trick people into believing that, oh, you do want this now. Like it was it was a nasty polyester like suit jacket that somebody bought for their first foray into the corporate world, and they've graduated from that and found something more appropriate for maybe their budget now that they've climbed the ladder. Or it's something completely out of style. Like I've been ending up with a lot of really like nasty geometric prints from 10 years ago that I still haven't.
I know exactly.
Do you know what I'm talking about?
Oh yeah, I full body cringe when you said it.
We all remember. We
all remember.
I probably owned a few things of this nature in the form of leggings, and I feel like I'm kind of pulling one over on people by, painting it, dyeing it, slashing it, reconfiguring it, smashing it together with other materials, and kind of hiding that history underneath all these different layers of creative intervention, and then bringing it back forward and saying, hey, do you want it now? What do you think now? Do you like it now?
I mean, I appreciate that. So here's my question. Like, how did you get started on this path? I mean, sure, there's a chance you were like 5 and you were like, I see that there's going to be this problem with wasted textiles. I'm going to start building my whole life towards this. But I suspect probably not. So how did you find yourself here resolving or trying to resolve fabrics that no one wants?
Funny because it started pretty young. Like you're almost spot on. My parents own.
That's great.
Yeah, it truly has been a lifelong pursuit. My parents owned a clothing manufacturing company when I was growing up, and this was in the 90s when still I think it was about 50% or more of clothing consumed within the United States was made within the United States. And so at that time, they manufactured everything in Seattle, Washington, where I grew up. And so I was homeschooled through 9th grade, and I spent a lot of time at the warehouse just hanging out. and making things. I played with the fabric scraps from the cutters. I learned how to sew. I first learned how to sew on just like a home sew machine, but at a young age I was working on an industrial machine, and Connie, the sample sewer, would sometimes help me. Sometimes she'd bat me off the machine and finish my projects for me. But it was really a big part of my education, was seeing the behind the scenes of garment production, and also using clothing and my personal styling explorations as a way of expressing myself creatively, but also really approaching fashion as an art form from a young age. But my parents' company closed in the early 2000s, in part because September 11th happened during New York Fashion Week. And so that meant that particular season, the showrooms shut down, buyers went home, and a small brand like my parents, being like a boutique brand, they really struggled to pull through with that rift in sales. And then post 9/11, there was a recession across the country, and that meant a lot of people were choosing to diminish their budget for clothing. And being that my parents were making high quality clothing and manufactured under ethical conditions, it was more expensive than fast fashion, which was on the rise. Like, that was a new interjection into the market in the United States. And so their company closed in the early 2000s, and that meant both my parents lost their jobs at the same time. So I feel like a certain aspect of my pursuit in fashion is to recover from that early childhood trauma. And I do sometimes feel a little bit like Inigo Montoya from The Princess Bride, like, you killed my father, prepare to die, like, against fast fashion. I feel like fast fashion killed my parents' company, and I want them to die. So I went to Parsons School of Design to study fashion, even though when I told my parents I'm going into fashion, they were like, maybe don't. Like, maybe consider something else. And now thinking back, I'm like, oh, they were so right. I could have been a scientist or a therapist or someone who like has a quote unquote legitimate job with a steady paycheck, but I chose to pursue fashion, and I'm grateful that I did, because at school that's where I learned about the zero waste pattern drafting methodology, which has become one of the foundations of my practice today. And by that point, I already had been radicalized. I was in, believe it or not, it was like a church youth group. We were learning about human trafficking and modern day slavery, and participating in all these different events of like awareness and fundraising. And I was about 15 when I learned that most clothing consumed in the United States, even by that point, that was like 3 or 4 years after my parents' company closed, most clothing that we were consuming was connected to exploitive labor. And so at 15, I decided I cannot buy newly manufactured clothing and feel okay about myself, or what I'm contributing to the world, or the way that I'm contributing to other people's lives. And so I have over the years made some concessions, but to the best of my ability, I still don't buy newly manufactured clothing. And the concessions would be like, if a friend has a brand and I trust that they are producing within ethical conditions, or there's been a couple times that like I've bought a t-shirt to support a nonprofit, or tennis shoes are really hard to find, like something that's sustainable and ethical. So I have had to make concessions, but I entered college with that very radical mindset, and ended up in conflict with quite a few of my professors, and also in conflict because I was trying to approach fashion design from an artist lens, and I was going to a very commercially focused design school that was all about churning out the next Marc Jacobs. And I didn't necessarily see myself as that, and I also didn't see how the way I wanted to create fashion, or the way that I related to fashion, really fit in with the corporate understanding of, designer brands and all the things you have to do to make a business like that sustainable, because it really doesn't come down to the clothing in the end in order to balance the budget. So leaving school, I felt really unmoored. Like I just didn't know how to do what I wanted to do. And so I kind of ran away from what I wanted to do with my life, and I became a tour guide in Seattle. There's this underground part of the city. Yeah. I was a tour guide for a company, and I'd take guests down and tell them the history of and answer questions. And it was actually a great experience. I learned a lot about how to communicate, and met people from all around the world. And it balanced my other job, which was working for an artist as a studio assistant and then weaving chairs. We did cane, wicker, Danish modern. I learned how to weave all kinds of different chairs. And so that was like a very isolated, contemplative work environment. And then tour guiding was very social and high energy. So I did those two things. And I had a collaboration with a friend for about 7 years, but that kind of crashed and burned in 2020. And so at that point, that's when I really was forced into starting my brand and figuring out how to build a career in the arts that was sustainable, which sustainable for me is a plural word. It's both about the means of manufacturing and the materials, but also energetically and emotionally sustainable, which I feel like I'm still trying to figure that out.
I also hear that. I have to have this conversation with myself quite a bit. And, like it has felt this year that a lot of like slow fashion brands and makers have been sort of like shutting down. And I do think a big part of that is how difficult it is to make doing right now, like in the times that we live in. It's really difficult to make things ethically and sustainably while also being emotionally, spiritually, creatively, financially sustainable. Like it, right? It's like, because it's all of these things. It's all of these things. And I think sometimes it's like, you know what? I'm tired of worrying about money. I'm bowing out, right? Or sometimes it's like, I'm tired of worrying about money and I'm just so burnt out because this work is not physically sustainable. All of the people I know who work in this space, I mean, they're working really, really hard all the time. And while also worrying. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
It is always an insane amount of work, but just make like slightly more. Like keep working this hard, but just like bump it up slightly. I feel I felt really stuck just in a space of grinding myself into oblivion and not being able to leverage that to like get to that next level.
I mean, I have had this conversation with so many of my clients over the past couple months because it's sort of like, it's like, oh, here's some advice for you. What you really need is to be able to do more sales so that you can hire someone to help you. But in order to do more sales, you have to have more work to sell. And you can't hire anyone to do that until you do the more sales. And it's like, I don't have an answer either. It's unfair for sure. How do you exist as an artist in late stage capitalism?
Exhausting question.
It is.
My first response is like, oh, I see how other people, like there is a method of small makers where you kind of put an idea out there and see how the market responds to it, and then go with your best results and allow yourself to be pigeonholed into like a certain aesthetic or a certain product or a certain material and like really own that. And then get rewarded by continuing to produce like the same flavor and just like slightly subtle variations. So I think that's one way that people do it. And I'm like, I do not know how to do that, because part of my work is accepting the material that comes my way, and there's almost no way that I could boil it down to just one kind of material or one kind of aesthetic or one kind of idea, because I also am willing to just allow my creativity and my expression and even my brand identity to morph, so long as, for me, the foundation is it's always zero waste, it's always reclaimed materials, and it's always authentic to the moment that I'm in, which I think usually is pretty in line with what's happening out there more broadly, but maybe it's like a little off kilter. But I feel like what I've had to do, especially since 2020, because in 2020 I lost all my jobs. Like the tours shut down because you can't take 40 people underground during a pandemic, and the artist I worked for moved, so I could no longer work for him in the studio. So being forced to, or feeling forced to monetize my creative labor and really build a brand, I've had to turn myself into a one-woman factory and just pump out as much as possible. And thankfully my method allows for that, because I'm always trying to resolve the material at hand. And so I always have an opportunity to make and make and make and make and make and make and make. But that's been my solution. It's like, make more and sell it for less. And learn.
When you say it out loud.
I know, it's so, I mean, yeah, that's been the way, is like to play the game, to like be a part of this system that is churning itself into the ground, like allow myself to be churned into the ground. And I'm good at that. Like, that's been one of my survival tools, is just working myself beyond my capacity and not acknowledging it, and staying in that space so that I never allow myself to experience burnout. If I don't take a break, then I won't recognize how exhausted I am, and that'll allow me to keep going. That's a terrible answer. Like, that's how I'm doing
honestly, everything you just said is exactly where I have been, and remain. So I think I sometimes will, and I'm sure you hear this from people sometimes, where someone will be like, I just don't know why you just don't take a break or do less, or this, like, you might, like, the implication is like that you don't care for yourself or love yourself, I guess. And I'm like, that's actually not true at all. In fact, I love myself so much that I am willing to put in all this work for this thing that really is important to me, because I want to make myself happy, like, I don't know. I think that people have definitely, like, I don't know, like, work shamed me in that way. And I'm like, I promise that if I'm too tired, I'm not going to do it. Like, just relax. Yeah.
Not be so tired that I can't do my work. And I will publicly admit, past 2 days, I slept until 8 a.m. Unheard of.
Wild.
And I think it's because I knew I was choosing to get up early, and like be available early for this interview. And so I allowed myself to make some adjustments and sleep in a little more, and maybe take it a little easier at my studio, because I'm kind of dragging my feet on some projects. And I've noticed that too. I think that's where I'm pushing back against myself. I'm working on I just did a huge collection. I made 167 garments in collaboration with Prairie Underground, which is a Seattle garment manufacturer, and they produce 100% in Seattle, 80% in their own warehouse, and then 20% with contractors. And so I've had the privilege of working with them quite a bit this year, which going to their warehouse is like stepping back in time. It feels like my childhood. I'm like, it's like going home. I feel so comfortable here. But I did this collaboration where I reworked their dead stock or damaged garments and kind of excess textiles into this. It's a massive collection. So that just seemed to drag on. Like I couldn't get it done because, again, being zero waste, like I had seams and little scraps and all these materials I just kept having to find a solution for. And right after that, I've got a friend who's getting married, and so I'm making her wedding dress, and I was dragging my feet on it, and we had a fitting on a Friday, and I didn't have anything ready until Thursday evening. Like, I allowed myself to wait until the day before the fitting to get all her samples done. And I'm like, that's how I push back against working myself as hard as I do. Like, sometimes I do choose to drag my feet a little bit and then like turn the heat up just before the deadline and get it done. And I would have never acted that way in college. I always had my projects done like 3 to 5 days in advance. And so I feel a little rebellious being like, I got it done just before the deadline.
Okay, so let's talk about 14 hours, which is, I mean, would you call this like a performance art project?
I think so. It is very,
okay.
I mean, the purpose is putting on public display the lived experience of garment workers across the world.
And what made you decide to do this? Like, what was the process to getting there?
It's interesting because I've had people ask me this, and I've tried to think it over. I cannot remember the moment where I thought, I'm going to sew for 14 hours a day, 6 days in a row. Like, when did that come to my mind? At some point last year. But I don't know exactly why, aside from the fact that, hey, garment workers work like 10 to 16 hours a day sewing or pressing or cutting or folding. You know, there's a lot of different aspects to producing a garment, but a good majority of them are just sitting at machines sewing. Like, what would that feel like? And I think part of the impetus is over a decade ago in 2012, my professor, Timo Rasanen, who was the one that taught me the zero waste design methodology, he and a collaborator, Sala Celine, put on a performance that was a part of a broader exhibition looking at the intersection of art and fashion. It was in Helsinki, Finland, at the Amos Anderson Museum, and both Timo and Sala are Finnish. And the installation that they created was called 15%. And so it required someone to be live in the museum, cutting, sewing, pressing, folding white t-shirts on display for the public to come witness. And I ended up having the privilege to play that role of garment worker in the museum. And the title 15% comes from the percentage of material that's wasted in the production of clothing. It's about 15%, which represents, like, if you think about the positive shape of a neckline, it's a U, but then you have that half circle of fabric that's cut away and thrown out. And that equates to be about 15% of the fabric. So whenever someone bought a t-shirt, which the t-shirts I was making live were for sale in the gift shop, you would also buy a little tissue wrapped, a little bag with tissue wrapped scraps in it. And so it was all the negative parts of the positive t-shirt to also represent that you, the consumer, when you buy a garment, you're paying for all 3 yards or 2 yards, whatever it takes to make that garment. But the clothing brand, they've decided to throw 15% of that fabric away, even though you paid for it. So in this case, we're like, hey, you get to keep all the fabric, but now you also get to figure out what to do with these scraps. And the other element of it was the t-shirts were available for €5. And so people would come back in after watching me make a shirt, they'd go and buy one, and they'd come back in and they're like, I just watched you make this shirt from start to finish. How can it only be €5 in the gift shop? That's so cheap. And honestly, the only thing I could really say was, exactly, like, how is it so cheap? Because you can go to H&M in the mall next door and you can buy a white t-shirt there for €5. Like, how do they do it? And clearly the answer is exploitation. It's slavery. It's unethical working conditions that allow for companies to completely degrade their workforce for the benefit of their CEOs, their stockholders, like for their bottom line. So that performance, I felt really honored to be a part of it. But leaving it, I didn't really know what to do with that in my own practice. And so it's taken me over 10 years to figure out, how do I represent a similar concept or a similar message in my own practice. 14 hours sort of, it became a callback to 15% and maybe a retelling or a reinterpretation of the narrative, and a representing of this reality in the realm of the white box, the gallery, the museum. So I think that's in part where the inspiration for 14 hours came from. And then actually executing the performance, I have a friend who works with Fashion Revolution, and he mentioned that Fashion Revolution Week was happening in April, and I'm like, oh, I have this idea for a performance. Maybe I'll try to put it together during that week. And I reached out to Prairie Underground, who I've been working with quite a bit this year, and said, I've got this idea for a performance. I sent them a little write-up about it. And what I really needed in order to execute the performance successfully was a white box, some sort of sterile space to present it in, because I didn't want to do it in my studio, because my studio is full of like my tchotchkes and memorabilia, and it's very comfortable, and I kind of make my own rules in my studio. And so I wanted a place that felt a little more foreign, a little more uncomfortable, and clinical, like being kind of clean and minimal and devoid of my personality. So I asked Prairie Underground, they have a gallery space at the front of their warehouse, and I sent them the proposal. And I also needed an industrial machine because that felt very important for the reality of a garment worker. They are going to be working with an industrial machine, but also for the speed of the work, it was just going to be faster and more successful if I had an industrial machine to use. And so I asked Prairie, could you provide me with space? Could you provide me with the machine? And they were like, yeah, of course. And so then all of a sudden I'm like, oh, okay, I guess I'm doing this performance now. So I just set up to do it, and I did it.
So did people come to watch you?
That was an option. Yeah, they are. They also, next to their gallery, they have a store. And so the store at Prairie Underground is open from, I think, 10 to 4 most days. So people, they could walk by. There's a window facing the street, so people could walk by and see me through the window. But they could also come in and visit or chat with me during the performance. But very few people came to visit. And I don't take that personally. I told my mom, I'm like, you could come by on Saturday if you want, on my last day, and visit me. It's you know, there is sort of nothing to see. The one cool thing that happened was a professor at the University of Washington found out about the project through a friend of mine and brought some of his grad students down from the art department, and they came to see the performance, and I was able to talk with them about more of the nuts and bolts of the performance, you know, as opposed to more of the messaging, which that was cool to share with them, because it's a hard thing to put together. It feels like performance art can be really rigid and unforgiving, but I gave myself a lot of agency, in part because this is sort of a rough draft. I see 14 hours happening again in the future, and so I allowed this to be a little bit more experimental of, you know, what's the best approach, what are the different variations of the method. So I was able to talk with them about that, but I also live streamed it so people could tune in. I did it on Twitch. I had a neighbor who one day, it was 11 o'clock at night, and he was like, hey, can you come out and watch my car for me? And I was like, sure. And he was loading all of this like really expensive sound and video, like audio equipment into his car. And I found out like he's an AV guy, and that's what he does for work. And afterwards he was like, I totally owe you one. And I said, I have this project coming up where I have to live stream for 14 hours a day for 6 days in a row, and I don't know how to do that. I am not a tech person. Like, I barely want to participate on Instagram, like, for the sake of my business, like, I'd rather just be invisible online if I could manage that. And so I consulted with him, and he did the research and said, because I thought YouTube, but he told me you can only live stream on YouTube for up to 12 hours. And Instagram maxes out at 4 hours. And so he said Twitch is the only platform that you can live stream for 14 hours. So I signed up, and I got some trolls on one day.
Oh, really? Gosh.
Yeah, until I figured out how to turn off comments for only people who follow you or whatever. But somebody said my website looked like shitty children's drawings, and I was like, thank you. Actually, that's a compliment. And they were also like, what is she sewing? Is it pants? Is it a curtain? No one will know. But I felt like that's also part of the performance, because who cares what I was sewing for 14 hours? It ultimately doesn't matter.
You were telling me that people wanted to see, like, didn't your mom ask you to see what you were sewing? And you're kind of like, your aunt. Okay. And you were kind of like, that's kind of part of the point I'm trying to make.
Yeah, my aunt was texting me. She was like, wave at the camera. And so I'd wave and like grimace, like, okay, I'm not a monkey. And then she'd be like, what are you sewing? Good. Show us what you're sewing. And it was a part of the messaging in that I set myself up to sew for 14 hours a day. And the product that I created, I originally, as I said, I allowed the project to sort of morph into what it became. I had ideas, but I allowed those ideas to change. And so originally what I wanted to do was just sew 2 pieces of fabric together in straight lines for 14 hours to represent the monotony of the action of sewing, but also the futility of what many of these garment workers are producing, because I think it's 30% of all garments produced are never sold, let alone worn.
Yep, it's devastating.
Right? Like, they end up in landfills, they end up being shipped to developing nations that don't want to deal with these problems. They get dumped in the Atacama Desert, where they're set on fire eventually. And so I wanted to represent that, there's millions of people living their lives where they're literally wasting their time sewing nothing for no one. So I just wanted to produce nothing by the end of it. But I realized in partnering with Prairie Underground, since they do their production in-house, they had production scraps. And I thought, okay, so I can add another layer to this where I am utilizing their production scraps to alleviate some of their waste, but also do something slightly more interesting for myself each day. So I had an opening event, and people came and were very confused about what I was doing. And I'm like, the project hasn't started yet. I'm not here, I started it on a Monday. And so this is the Saturday before. Like, I wasn't there that Saturday prior sewing for 14 hours. I was just sampling different textile manipulations that I could use in that coming week. And I set out to have a different material each day, because Prairie Underground works with a variety of different textiles. So I'd have a bag of, I had a bag of white cotton jersey knit. And so I was just experimenting with different textile manipulations to figure out on day 3, day 4, what was I going to do. And so by the end of the opening, I had a variety of different textile manipulations that involved sewing one piece of fabric to another, but sometimes I was like folding the fabric, I was pleating the fabric, I was twisting the fabric, I was doing something slightly interesting but repetitive. And the stitches were always straight lines. I just sewed vertical straight lines for 14 hours every day. The thing that shifted was the way that I was manipulating the fabric, the top fabric on top of the backing. And so after day one, I had this very large piece of, you could call it textile art, tapestry, quilt, something. And I just rolled it up and like put it on this shelf. And that's how it stayed for the whole performance. And I thought by the end of it, like, oh, that's kind of how I want to present this work, is just rolled up and obscured. So people can't actually see the labor inside of it. And I was also choosing textile manipulations where the fabric would layer over and sort of hide the stitching so that you couldn't really see the work. Like the work was there, but it was obscured by the method, in the same way that when I look at a garment, I don't always think about the hands that sewed it or cut it. I just look at the garment and I'm like, cute, or oh, this is kind of ugly, or it's not for me, or I just think about it from a more subjective point of view than actually being, except if sometimes it's like something really exceptional and it draws you in towards looking at the labor. Most garments aren't created like that. Like it's a t-shirt, whatever, you look at the print on the front of it, you don't look at the seams inside. So I was trying to find textile manipulations that lent to that, where you weren't really looking at the work, you were looking at the product of the work, and the work itself sort of disappeared into the background. Because that's how life is for garment workers. Like their work actually doesn't matter.
It's horrible to say that out loud, but we know that that's true. I mean, I still encounter people all the time who aren't living in this like slow fashion bubble, who do believe that like robots of some sort are making our clothing. And I'm not talking like a C3PO, but like it's somehow very automated.
Yeah.
Is their assumption, which I get, because like that's how Cheetos are made, and that's how like industrial bread, like, in a bag is made, and like frozen foods and all kinds of things are really, they're made by machines monitored by people. But clothing, yes, there's a sewing machine involved, but the human element is like, it doesn't exist without the humans. The humans aren't there monitoring, they're making. And I think that work is just so invisible to people, even, like you said, even to people like us who know the labor involved. We still view an article of clothing as like, oh, that's cute. Ew, it's ugly. I would never wear that. That's amazing. But it's the garment that is amazing or cute or ugly. It's not the work, right? And I think that is probably, I would say, of all of the things we consume in our day-to-day life, I feel like clothing is the one where we're the most unaware of the human labor involved. And I mean, and that says a lot, because everything we touch is in one way or another made by humans, but clothing is so human intensive, and we're just completely unaware of it. Yeah, we're more likely to be like, ooh, that fabric, or, oh, I don't like that print. Yeah, right? But we're never like, oh, but like, how's the sewing? I think it makes it really easy for people to overlook the massive exploitation built into this industry, because you have to do extra work to remember that people made the things. Like you have to do extra mental work to remember that. I look at the way that the industry itself, when it's greenwashing, when it's trying to sell us the latest like conscious or sustainable collection, it's always about the fabrics, right? It's about like, this is a recycled polyester, or this is, organic cotton. But they never talk about the people who made the clothes. And that's because they don't have to, because people forget about that. I think we focus so much on even just the materials and the environmental impact of those materials and those clothes. And we don't think enough, and I say the collective we, not necessarily you or me, but like the collective we don't think about the human cost of it all, because we've been like taught to focus on the material aspect of it.
What is the human cost? Like, what is the toll of sewing for 14 hours a day 6 days in a row. And I found at a certain point, like it wasn't, I think my body, if I continued to do it, because I only did it for a week, because I chose to do it for a week, and then I could go back to my regular programming and choose to live the life that I'm living. And I think if I had continued to do it, I would have felt a lot more physical effects, because most people after the fact or during it, they're like, wow, how are your fingers? How are your hands? They must be so tired or so sore. And I'm like, well, you know, I sew every day. Like it's not like I just came to do this out of the blue. Like this is work that's really built into my day to day. And so it wasn't my fingers and my hands that were sore. Like my hips got a little uncomfortable, and maybe that's just because of the chair that I was sitting in. And you know, my neck and back felt a little hunched over because of the action of hunching over a sewing machine. But the thing that was most upset throughout the performance was my stomach. Like just sitting for 14 hours. And as I said, I designed this to be a little mushy in some places as far as the method that I was using each day. Like I didn't have quality control, so I could, you know, allow the work to be a little more emotional and show the periods where I was kind of losing it or I felt like really on. And so the work kind of has that ebb and flow of emotional energy. But the thing I didn't really train for was sitting for 14 hours a day. I only allowed myself to get up to use the bathroom every 2 hours. And at noon, I could take a 20-minute lunch break. But it was so short that really I had to stay in my chair and eat at my sewing machine because I didn't have time to like get up and go do anything. And then if I was still hungry at 6, I could take a 10-minute dinner break. But I found just sitting and sewing, like I was using so little energy, but I was still like feeding myself as I normally would. And so my stomach like all day was just upset from the lack of mobility and then like the lack of use of the energy I was consuming. Like I really didn't need it. I would eat half a salad at noon and just be like, I feel sick. Like I feel so full, I'm sick, and I haven't even eaten half of my lunch. And it was a decent salad. Like it had roasted vegetables in it and chickpeas and, you know, like a really nice hearty dressing. It wasn't a wimpy salad by any means, but it just, yeah, like the most consistent motion of the day was an ankle flex only on my right foot. And, you know, with an industrial machine, to lift the presser foot, you use your knee. So I'm pressing my knee, only my right knee, out and in to lift the presser foot, and then just pushing fabric through the machine. And sometimes I had to really like wrangle the fabric, so maybe there was more times where I really got like my arms and my back into moving the fabric around. But for the most part, it was just like ankles, fingers, and wrists, and that was all that was moving. And I noticed, you know, after day one, like, oh, I didn't train myself in this one particular way. And what I really needed to train was like my internal body. It wasn't about training my arms and my legs and even my mind. Like it felt actually very meditative the first day. Like, oh, I can do this, until about 10 hours. That's when I hit a wall and I'm like, I think I want to be done now, but I have 4 more hours of sewing to do. But what I really need to do was like train my internal organs to be willing to live life like that. Because usually at my studio, like I'm crouching down, I'm standing up, I'm walking around, I'm going up and down stairs, I'm leaving when I need to, like I'm sitting down, I'm standing up, I'm sitting down, I'm standing up. I move a lot more in very small ways, and sewing for 14 hours doesn't afford that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a really interesting call out, is that like, you know, we talk a lot about obviously like the financial exploitation of garment workers, and certainly that they're working really long hours doing difficult, skilled work.
Mm-hmm.
But there are these other quality of life issues, right? Like there is the wear and tear on your body over time, beyond even just like your hands using a sewing machine, but your body as a whole. And just that like good health, generally feeling well, means moving around throughout the day. I mean, this is a conversation we have constantly about office workers, and there's like desk treadmills and standing desks and all these other gadgets that have been invented to minimize the physical impact of having to sit at a desk all day. Well, there's no option to have a treadmill under your sewing machine, or go take a walk at lunchtime, or, you know, get up and stretch every hour. And these are serious quality of life and health concerns.
Yeah.
That, yeah.
I felt like I did some kind of it's like my body just, it didn't feel well. Like I can't keep doing this unless I seriously change the way that I engage with food or my expectations about my body's ability. Like I would have to seriously diminish the way that I lived in the world. Like I just have to get smaller, like eat less because I'm moving less, and just shrink down.
It is so difficult for many people to imagine what it is to be a garment worker in the era of fast fashion. And I think telling these stories is how people can start to see themselves in it and understand it in a bigger way. Because often this is a pushback I get all the time, honestly, when I talk to people about garment workers and what their day-to-day lives are like and how little they're paid. The pushback I get from people who, you know, they just kind of don't want to hear it, or they're not ready to hear it, is, well, things are different over there, right? It's always that things are different. And I'm like, these are not a different species of people, right? We're all humans. We have the same physiology. There is a toll from doing this work, right? And having it as your only or best option. And your ability to eat or have a place to live at all is dictated by you coming to work every day and sitting still for 14 hours and letting that job over time degrade your body and your quality of life, all in the stake for survival, right? And I mean, I think about this a lot, even with warehouse workers, to put it in a realm that maybe it feels more familiar to some people because they might know someone who's worked in a warehouse, or they themselves have. Is like, someone said this a couple years ago on Reddit, and it has stuck with me since then, that warehouse work used to, it doesn't even now pay as well, but you know, in 2020 and 2021, it was one of the better paying jobs that you could have, better than, say, retail, because basically what the companies were paying you for was to slowly break your body. And then, you know, because you're not going to have a long career in a warehouse. Like, your body can't take it, right? It's just too much. You might get a couple years before you start having physical issues, maybe even sooner. And that's why, you know, at that point, now, of course, like, warehouse pay has also gone down. But you know, people were like, Amazon warehouses were starting people at like $25 an hour, right? And it was because we're paying to destroy your body at the same time. And I think, like, the difference here is that, like, well, I don't think that's okay either. But for garment workers, they are also destroying their bodies and their quality of life to make us clothes that we'll barely wear, if at all. And they're not being paid a living wage on top of that. So it is worse. And I get a lot of pushback on TikTok, especially, where people are like, well, I'm overworked and I'm tired too, and I'm always broke. And I'm like, I think you need to understand, well, one, we don't uphold all systems of oppression because we exist within a system of oppression, right? And two, I promise you that the situation that garment workers are living within is worse. Even just that they're sitting in a sewing machine for 14 hours a day. Let's take a moment to thank some of the incredible small businesses who keep Clotheshorse going via their generous Patreon support. Selena Sanders, a social impact brand that specializes in upcycled clothing using only reclaimed vintage or thrifted materials, from tea towels, linens, blankets, and quilts. Sustainably crafted in Los Angeles, each piece is designed to last in one's closet for generations to come. Maximum style, minimal carbon footprint. Shift Clothing out of beautiful Astoria, Oregon, with a focus on natural fibers, simple hardworking designs, and putting fat people first. Discover more at shiftwheeler.com. Late to the party, creating one-of-a-kind statement clothing from vintage, salvaged, and thrifted textiles. They hope to tap into the dreamy memories we all hold. Floral curtains, a childhood dress, the wallpaper in your best friend's rec room, all while creating modern, sustainable garments that you'll love wearing and have for years to come. Late to the Party is passionate about celebrating and preserving textiles, the memories they hold, and the stories they have yet to tell. Check them out on Instagram at Late to the Party People. Vino Vintage, based just outside of LA. We love the hunt of shopping secondhand because you never know what you might find. Catch us at flea markets around Southern California by following us on Instagram at vino.vintage so you don't miss our next event. Dylan Page is an online clothing and lifestyle brand based out of St. Louis, Missouri. Our products are chosen with intention for the conscious community. Everything we carry is animal-friendly, ethically made, sustainably sourced, and cruelty-free. Dylan Page is for those who never stop questioning where something comes from. We know that personal experience dictates what's sustainable for you, and we are here to help guide and support you to make choices that fit your needs. Check us out at dylanpage.com and find us on Instagram at dylanpagelife&style. Salt Hats, purveyors of truly sustainable hats, hand-blocked, sewn, and embellished in Detroit, Michigan. Find us on Instagram at Salt Hats. Gentle Vibes Vintage. We are purveyors of polyester and psychedelic relics. We encourage experimentation and play not only in your wardrobe, but in your home too. We have thousands of killer vintage pieces ready for their next adventure. See them all on Instagram at Gentle Vibes Vintage. Thumbprint is Detroit's only fair trade marketplace, located in the historic Eastern Market. Our small business specializes in products handmade by empowered women in South Africa, making a living wage, creating things they love like hand-painted candles and ceramics. We also carry a curated assortment of sustainable and natural locally made goods. Thumbprint is a great gift destination for both the special people in your life and for yourself. Browse our online store at thumbprintdetroit.com and find us on Instagram at thumbprintdetroit. High Energy Vintage is a fun and funky vintage shop located in Somerville, Massachusetts, just a few minutes away from downtown Boston. They offer a highly curated selection of bright and colorful clothing and accessories from the 1940s to the 1990s for people of all genders. Husband and wife duo Wiley and Jessamy handpick each piece for quality and style, with a focus on pieces that transcend trends and will find a home in your closet for many years to come. In addition to clothing, the shop also features a large selection of vintage vinyl and old school video games. Find them on Instagram at High Energy Vintage, online at highenergyvintage.com, and at markets in and around Boston. Vagabond Vintage DTLV is a vintage clothing, accessories, and decor reselling business based in downtown Las Vegas, Nevada. Not only do we sell in Las Vegas, but we're also located throughout resale markets in San Francisco, as well as at a curated boutique called Lux and Ivy, located in Indianapolis, Indiana. Jessica, the founder and owner of Vagabond Vintage DTLV, recently opened the first IRL location located in the Arts District of downtown Las Vegas on August 5th. The shop has a strong emphasis on 60s and 70s garments, single-stitch tees, and dreamy loungewear. Follow them on Instagram at Vagabond Vintage DTLV and keep an eye out for their website coming fall of 2022. So something else that you were telling me is like you sort of You set some other rules for yourself, not even just breaks, but for example, that you made yourself ride your bike to and from the factory each day. Why did you decide to do that, and what was that like?
The motivation for that came from the reality of the financial compensation for 84 hours of labor in a week. And I do want to note, I was specifically looking at garment workers in Bangladesh because there's some of the lowest paid and subjected to some of the most dangerous and unsafe working conditions. And I did work myself slightly more because legally a 72-hour work week is the maximum. But I chose 84 hours to represent the fact that even though by law in Bangladesh, a garment worker can work 8 hours plus 4 hours of overtime for 6 days a week, in reality, they are often working more than that, especially during certain times of the year where they're working towards a deadline for a season, or like every garment clothing company is coming to them at the same time trying to get production done, and so that ups the amount of production they have to do within a narrow window of time. So I was working myself slightly more, and I was also paying myself slightly less, because I think in Bangladesh, it's $113 a month is the legal minimum. And that's something they had to fight for. It's up from $90. And garment workers were asking for like $220 a month. And, Western fashion brands don't want to pay that. And so they settled on $113. And that's the other thing, speaking to what you just said about people pushing back and saying things like, well, at least they have a job, or, I work a lot and I'm underpaid too. Okay. Garment workers in Bangladesh, they're making $113 a month, but $86 is the average cost of a one-bedroom rental in a city. And if you're working for a garment factory, you have to live in a city, and you have to live close to where you work. So I paid myself slightly less. It's like $4.70 is the average per day. And I paid myself $3.50 a day. Again, to represent that even if $4.70 daily wage is the average, there are people making less and there's people making more. But to make $3.50 in Seattle, Washington a day, that meant I couldn't afford to take the bus in two directions. It's $2.70, $1.75, one direction to take the bus. And if I'm making $3.50 a day, I definitely cannot afford to have a car. So that meant my only means of transportation, being that the factory was 13 miles south of my apartment, my only means of transportation was my bike. And historically, I have ridden my bike everywhere. And that's in part because when I moved back to Seattle after graduating from college and performing 15% in Finland, I couldn't afford a car when I first moved back here. And so I would bike everywhere. And it also felt like a choice that was a positive action towards the climate by reducing my personal carbon emissions. But since the pandemic, I haven't had to commute as much because my commute was mainly from my jobs, and I didn't have those jobs anymore. So I was just riding to and from my studio, and my studio happened to be a lot closer than my two jobs had been. So I felt, leading up to 14 hours, a certain amount of anxiety about going back to that lifestyle of having a really big commute. It meant I had to ride 26 miles a day for 6 days in a row. And I knew I could do it, but I was like, oh, do I want to do this? And I didn't. Especially because when When I signed myself up for this project, we live 7 miles north of the factory. And then between the time that I got all the pieces together and the performance actually happened, we moved 6 miles farther north.
Oh my gosh.
So that my commute basically doubled. So originally I was only supposed to ride 14 miles a day, which in my world, that sounds really manageable. But I'm like, 26 miles.
Yeah.
It's just, it's doable, but I didn't want to do it. But I had to do it. And I was even talking with some of the folks who work at Prairie Underground, thinking, should I choose to sleep here? Because if I'm working 14 hours a day, just doing the math, that was the other thing about this project. I'm like, just doing the math is really sobering. Working 14 hours a day means I only have 10 hours that I'm not working.
Yeah.
And so in theory, I should be sleeping at least 7 of those hours. So then I have 3 hours left to live a human life. But if I'm living this far away from the factory, I'm having to commute 2.5 hours. So that means I really only have half an hour during the day where I'm not sleeping, sewing, or riding my bike. That, okay, garment workers in Bangladesh, at least they have a job, but you can't have a life under these conditions. If you're married, you have to be married to someone who works in the same factory as you, or you'll never see them. If you have children, I don't know how you raise them. I don't know how you would take care of them. And I don't know how that paycheck would even go towards supporting them. And the other thing is, a lot of these communities they live generationally. So you might have elders as well that you're trying to support and care for. And maybe they're helping out with the children. But then what do you do when one of them needs help or care? There's just no margins. There's no time. And there's no way to take a break or take a day off or be like, I need a mental health hour. The deadline isn't going to afford that. So that's what for me ended up being really sobering, and also helped me realize more clearly just how many choices, the luxury of my choices that I have throughout the day. I get to choose when I show up at my studio. I get to choose when I leave. I get to choose when I go use the bathroom. I get to choose when I take a lunch break. I get to choose if I want to finish something the next day. I get to choose if I want to shift from sewing to working on something on the computer, or doing some sort of designing or contemplating for a future project. I get to choose if I stand up, if I sit down, if I squat, if I sit on the floor, where, if I'm cutting something, if I have so many choices that someone working within the confines of a garment factory, they don't have. And so that, just the scheduling of it, and the physical restrictions of the project is what was really sobering for me, and coming to really embody the fact that, okay, yeah, I have a job, but I don't have a life, and I'm married. And my husband, leading up to this, he was like, so do you need to work really long, hard hours to make no money when you normally work really long, hard hours to make no money? And I'm like, how dare you?
Seriously.
Yes, I need to do this. And of course, he supports me, but he's also looking out for me too. A lot of people are like, are you going to be okay during this, after this? Is this going to be good for you? People were concerned about me coming up, during the opening event, being like, can I come check in on you? Can I bring you something to eat during the performance? People were really worried about me. And I'm like, why is anyone worried about me? I'm choosing to do this. No one is telling me to do this. I am choosing to do this. Why are we not more worried about the women, especially across the world? It's 80% of garment workers are female, and women of color. Why aren't we more worried about them and the lives that they are more or less obligated to live?
Yeah.
Why not show more concern and support for them? I don't need the concern. I don't need the support. That's also what felt I felt a little indignant anytime someone brought up that concern, but I also didn't want to shame someone for having empathy for me as an artist making a really radical decision. I respect that, but nobody needs to worry about me. Like, we need to worry about the millions of people who are trapped in these kinds of situations, and they don't have better options. And companies based in our country, companies who we benefit from, they are proactively trying to keep these people in this type of situation.
Yes. I think that's really important to call out, is that many, many people are working very hard to ensure that this system continues as is. Because it is the exploitation of these humans that really fuels this industry. Yes, consumers obviously fuel it on the opposite end with their money, but the pricing, the availability, the entire business model doesn't function if people aren't being underpaid and overworked in this way. It just, the math doesn't math. That said, like, it's interesting. I had this like revelation the other day where I was like, what if every time someone came to me on social media with a really bad faith argument that I've already had to talk about 5,000 times, if I could start charging them by the hour to explain it to them again? I was like, wow, that would be like a really great like income source for me, because it certainly is a lot of work and it's really annoying. And I was like, what if I could charge people $100 an hour to explain this thing that I've already explained 500 times to someone else when they know they're coming to the table with a bad faith argument in the first place? And I had posted this thing on Threads about, the Fashion Act and like how you could email representatives this week, blah, blah, blah. Very, like, to me, what's controversial there, really? And this woman shows up who of course I went and looked at her commenting history, and I think she just likes to fight with people on the internet as far as I can determine. But she was like, oh, so what you're saying is you don't want working class women to have anywhere to buy clothes anymore because you want to pay a living wage to garment workers. And I was like, wow, that is like exactly not what I said. And in fact, if garment workers were paid a living wage for where they live, because once again, things are not different over there. We have rent, we have food, we have quality of life, we have kids, family, friends, all that stuff, because we are humans, right? The paying these garment workers a living wage would we as customers would not even notice the difference in pricing. That's the thing. We don't give up anything in order for these people to have a better life. But companies do, right? They have to they have to take a few less cents in profit margin. I mean, the system is so broken anyway that that's just like one element of how broken it is. But I feel like this bad faith argument that, once again, I am willing, if anybody else wants me to talk to them about this, I will do it for the rate of $100 an hour, because I'm tired of having this conversation. We're not in an either or situation. It is not either garment workers make a living wage and have a better quality of life, and then we all walk around naked, or we can have a plethora of clothes and no one's naked while they suffer. That is not the scenario. And this is why I want to be paid $100 an hour to talk to people about this. I'm so tired of having this conversation. Like, this is not real. Like, just because life is hard for us does not mean it should be even harder for other people. We should be working to lift everyone up at the same time, because when one group of people is lifted up, we all are lifted with them. It's not if their life gets better, then mine gets worse. And to make this argument even more ridiculous, the way that people look at if garment workers have a better life, then my life gets worse. The way that they think it gets worse is that suddenly clothes are more expensive and they don't get to have lots of cute new clothes anymore. So it just makes this argument extra infuriating, as if we would ever think a steady stream of cheap clothes is more important than human life. I just can't with that argument anymore. And it's really, really frustrating to me. So for me, I think there is so much value in what you've done with 14 hours, because it's not even just the experience of people watching you do it. It is you talking about it afterwards that might reach some people and make these issues real to them, humanize them. That if someone said, if a friend of yours was given the option of either having lots of cheap new clothes all the time, and you having to work and live like this forever, or you not having to work and live like that forever and having a better quality of life, and they had, well, the same amount of clothes, but paid 25 cents more for them, why would they ever choose, no, I'd like to save that 25 cents. So Janelle, get back to the sewing machine. No, they would never, right? So anyway, if anybody wants to argue with me about it, send me $100 on PayPal and I'll set a timer for an hour and we'll argue. Maybe. I think I have like a headache all the time. What is $100 worth to me, I guess, is the real question. But I do think like there is this intense value in making what is hard to understand or feels distant real to others. And there are all these ways we can do it, right? It's like, talking to others and sharing information. But I think art plays a major role in that, in connecting people with experiences they don't understand or haven't been able to see on their own. Like I was telling you when we were prepping that I have this like dream where we raise money to just go around and dump trucks full of discarded textiles in like mall parking lots so that we can all like dig through it and show what we're finding. And like, hopefully people would watch and learn from that, because like we have to make it real, because right now, like the waste problem isn't real to most people either, because we don't see it. We are lucky in the global north that it is out of sight, out of mind. Yeah, we do. We do. And I think the issues of exploitation are one element of that we often we don't get to see, but we need to see to understand. I mean, I think some of us, when you were talking about the bicycle and how exhausted you were and how little free time you had, the closest experience that I had personally to that in my life was when my daughter was a baby and a toddler, and I was working retail, and in Portland, Oregon, I was working at Urban Outfitters, and I made $8 an hour. And after taxes and daycare and rent and food, diapers, all those things, I did not have enough money to take the bus to and from work, or to take my daughter anywhere on the bus. So I had to take her everywhere on my bike. And so in the morning, I would get up at 5 a.m. I would get dressed. I would get her dressed. I would put her on the back of my bike, later in a trailer, bike, I don't know, like 4 miles to her daycare, drop her off, drop off the trailer, bike 7 miles to work all day, get back on the bike back 7 miles, get her, put her in the trailer, bike home 4 miles, unless we just stopped for groceries, which we like always had to because we didn't have a car, so we could only get a little bit at a time. And I still would, after I put her to bed at night, I might have a couple hours of free time to read or draw or whatever, like 2 hours maybe. And then I'd have to go to sleep to get up and do it all again. And that is still nothing in comparison to the life of a garment worker, or to what you were experiencing. And yet, like, I can hear you talk about this, or I can even just think about what that experience is like. And I can liken it to that time in my life and how tired I was and how I didn't get to do social things or date or have friends or really do anything because I was just surviving. And yet that was a luxurious version of what garment workers are experiencing every day. And so I have life experience that can make that feel relatable and understandable to me, but not everyone does. And so I think like creating art that puts it in front of people can make it more real, which is important. That's like a really valuable thing for the world.
So 14 hours a day for 6 days in a row. The thought is like, why? Why do you have to do this? You don't have to do this. And I kept thinking, well, why not? Why not me? Like,
Yeah.
why am I not subject to this kind of lifestyle? Like, why do I deserve to be exempt from it when literally millions of women are not? Like, why them and not me? And I got to choose to live that life for that moment, and it felt like I I didn't become a part of the sewing machine in the same way. I was trying to equate it for folks who've not had this experience. What is an equivalent? And the story you just shared, like absolutely living through a time like that in your life sounds very similar to what I began to experience through this performance. The other synonym I was thinking of was driving a car for 14 hours a day.
I've done that. It's terrible. It's terrible.
Right?
Yeah.
And like getting up on day 5, day 6 to go and drive for another 14 hours and stay awake, stay alert, stay capable, stay safe. Like that, and because the action too, it's like you're just moving your arms, you're moving your foot. That's sewing, like that's, and you're just sitting in a chair for 14 hours. And that, in some ways it's like, you know, you become a part of the car, you become a part of the machine. And that's not necessarily what I felt as I was sewing. I'm like, I am my own machine, and I am having to stay conscious enough to work in concert with the sewing machine. And there were multiple times each day, like hitting 12 o'clock in the afternoon to take lunch, it felt like a gut punch. It wasn't like, oh, thank goodness I finally get a break. It was like, oh my gosh, I have 8 more hours of sewing to do, and I already sewed for 6. And so it felt like the 6 hours I just sewed didn't even happen. Like that was just a bonus. The work actually starts now at noon, because that's my 8-hour day of sewing. And I would also hit these moments where kind of midday, between maybe like 2 and 6, or maybe 2 and 4, because I would sew from 6 a.m. to 8 p.m. So yeah, but from 2 to 6, I really felt my energy dissipating, and like my willingness to stay on top of the ball and keep my momentum up. It just, after lunchtime, essentially really started to deplete. But then there would be a moment that I realized, oh, if I don't pick up the pace, I'm not going to hit this arbitrary goal that I've set for myself, whether it be covering all of the base fabric with this particular textile manipulation. Or there were 2 days where I was working on quilting squares, because the first 2 days I worked on huge yardage of fabric that I was having to roll and really push and fight through the machine. So by day 3, I was like, I don't want to do that anymore. So I was just working on quilting squares because it felt more manageable, but I had to do like 52 quilting squares with this really intricate textile manipulation. And so there would be a point where I started to drag, and then I realized if I don't pick up the pace, I'm not going to hit that goal. So then I'd have to kind of artificially motivate myself to like get my energy back up and like get myself moving again. And I would start to feel guilty for ever having felt depleted or tired, or as though I needed to or was slowing down. Whether or not I really was slowing down, I'm not sure, but I just felt myself slowing down. And so I'd feel guilty about that. Like, oh, I should have been more on my game, like kept my energy up so that I could meet this goal by the end of the day. Because if I don't meet the goal by the end of the day, I don't have time tomorrow to make up for my lack of production the day prior. So it was really interesting, even though I had a lot of agency and I wasn't working under the very strict conditions that garment workers do, I still felt some level of accountability to the process and the practice. And also I was under surveillance. I was being live streamed for 14 hours on Twitch. And so, you know, at times there would be someone tuned in watching me. And so I would start to feel paranoid, like, oh, did they just see me like stop sewing for 5 seconds? Like I just leaned back in my chair to take a little breather, and it's like, nope, can't do that. Somebody's watching, gotta keep sewing. And if I don't keep sewing, then I might not hit that goal, and I might not make it to the end of the day accomplishing everything that I have made myself obligated to accomplish. And I just, you know, I can't imagine showing up day in, day out, year in, year out, working under those conditions. It's inhumane. It's like purely inhumane. And at the end of the day, I kept thinking, well, if I am a garment worker, how would I feel to learn that everything I just created in the past month got dumped in some desert in Chile, like became a pile of clothing, got added to a pile of clothing so large it's visible from space? Like, how would I feel about the sacrifices that I was making and the situation I was stuck in? And if I'm only making, $4.70 a day, how am I going to get out of this situation? Like, the futility of the process became more and more apparent up until day 5. And then day 6 I thought was going to be the worst of all days, in part because it was a Saturday and the folks at Prairie Underground weren't in office that day. So I feared that being alone was going to make this experience that more excruciating, but it actually felt really liberating. And I think it's in part because on day 1 I had all this energy, like, oh, what a novelty, I'm just going to sew for 14 hours. Usually I'm having to spread my time throughout the day over 1,000 different to-dos and tasks, but I get to just sew for one day. And then by day 3 it's like no more novelty. Like, this is no longer fun or playful. Like, this got real. But then by day 6 I'm like, oh, I don't have to sew tomorrow. And so all of a sudden that novelty came back. And so I feel like in the middle of the project, that's when it felt most real and what I would suspect most true to the experience of a garment worker, that it's dehumanizing. Like, it's not that I became a part of the machine. I had to figure out a way to become a machine myself and think like a machine and act like a machine and treat myself like a machine so that I could be a machine. And on day 1 and day 2, the difference was I still had some semblance of my humanity, that I get Sunday off, and then Monday I can sleep until whenever I want. I don't have to wake up at 4 in the morning, so I can get on my bike at 4:30 to get to the warehouse by 5:30 so that I can start work at 6, so that I can sew until 8 p.m. and immediately leave, because if I don't, then I'm not going to be home until like 9:45, 10, because it took an hour and a half to ride home because it was more uphill than down, and then go to bed at like 10:30, 11, so I can wake up at 4 the next morning. Like, my humanity still existed day 1 and day 6, but in day 3, day 4, day 5, like I realized being a human was actually counterproductive to the task at hand.
I can't imagine, like, if I had done this once, as you've done, that I would ever be able to do it again, because it is such like a physical and psychological toll. And I think I would be filled with this dread. But you talked in the beginning about doing this again.
Yeah, I do. I plan to. I'm already talking with someone about finding a venue to do it again later this year. And there's this other element that I want to do a public performance of 14 hours, because Shein opened a fulfillment center in Bellevue, Washington, which is on the other side of the lake from Seattle. Yeah. And I really want to do 14 hours like on the doorstep of their building.
I support that, because some stuff just came out recently about their workers and some of their factories working, 70 plus hours a week.
Yeah. And like, should that be a shock or a surprise when you see their product and how, like, the fact that they make 100 billion garments a year or something obscene like that? Like, yeah, of course their factory workers are being exploited. So I want to go and set myself up right outside their building and make Shein knockoffs and sell them for less than Shein.
Wow. Wow.
Which, like, how could that be done? I basically would have to be giving these things away for free. And there,
Yeah, you'd have to be like eating the cost of the materials.
yeah, exactly. That's some of the logistics I need to figure out, because like no one funded 14 hours but for Prairie Underground providing me with free space and a machine, and my friend who helped me figure out the live stream came in and took like a professional video one day, and so he donated his time and support to the project. So there was no funding for 14 hours round one. And if round two is this like public protest against Shein, I'm gonna need to find some way to fund just the cost of materials, because I could end up producing a lot in one day, given like what trash their product is. And if I'm knocking off trash, I'm just going to be making more trash, and I can make a lot of trash if it's just like made trashy. So that could, I haven't figured out how to execute that iteration quite yet, but that's like on my mind. And then a friend in New York, I'm going to be spending some time there. She saw 14 hours and was like, come do it here. And if anybody could find me a venue to do this performance again, she could. So I think realistically, if I'm able, again, to find someone to donate a venue and an industrial machine and help connect me, I think using production waste feels like a really authentic contribution to the project. So if I can find production waste to work with again, I will definitely do it again. But as I was sewing during 14 hours and reflecting on all the ways I had provided myself with a lot of freedom in the project, I could see that I could work more restrictions into it, like having other people design the projects that I would do each day, or having other people source my materials for me, so that I just, as I do different iterations, I can eliminate some of those freedoms and luxuries that I had afforded myself, so that the experience can become that much more true to what a garment worker experiences.
Yeah.
Because, they don't get to choose if they're sewing jeans for Gap one day and, like baby dresses for Carter's the next. They just show up. They show up to the sewing machine each day, and they get assigned the task at hand. And so if they're working with denim, they're working with denim. If they're working with, a polyester, then they're working with a polyester. Those are my thoughts about how I could do different iterations going forward. But as of right now, there's no hard plan to do it again. But I am open if anybody wants to bring me on into their space to do this insane thing that's actually not that impressive and not that abnormal. That's the other thing about it. I'm like, why even celebrate this performance? It is not worth celebrating. It's not impressive. It's not a great feat. It's not even original. Like, I'm just cosplaying someone's real life. And that's kind of the point, to bring that more into the present reality of people's consideration as they're going out into the world to shop and consume clothing. But it's not even anything to celebrate. And so I feel like even the performance 14 hours should sort of dissipate into obscurity.
I know exactly what you mean, that like that work, that experience isn't valued. It's invisible. Why would this performance be valued more? But I also just think about, your friends and family telling you like, oh, you don't need to do this to yourself. You don't have to put yourself through this. Well, my question is, why should anyone?
Right.
Because that's happening right now as you and I are recording this. That is exactly the life that people are living. And they shouldn't have to live that either. This is like what makes me the saddest about this all. And there's like so much to be sad and angry about. It's like so much work, so much sacrifice, so much physical toll, so much negative impact on one's quality of life. And yet, who does it benefit? I guess it helps billionaires make more money, right? uh, it doesn't help us. I know, I think the conversation that comes up a lot, no one says this explicitly, but their language reflects it, that like we shouldn't criticize Shein because they make cheap clothes available to everyone, right? Like that, when people say that, what they're really saying is like, we need to preserve and protect Shein, this entire system, because they do this public service of selling us cheap clothes.
Right.
When you say it out loud like that, it sounds preposterous, but that's the underlying meaning when people jump in to say things like, you know, well, when you criticize Shein, where do you want poor people to get clothes? Like that's what people are saying, right? But really what you're saying is, oh, this company is in the public interest, which it's not. And these cheap clothes don't benefit us either, the customers. They don't benefit this planet. And obviously the creation of them involves exploitation and you know, suffering, unhappiness. So the only people who are benefiting from the system are people who already have way more than their fair share of everything. So why are we okay with this? You know, like I mean, I know this is something you think about all the time. So do I. But I do think like there is so much value in demonstrating this to people. Like I almost wish, in addition to charging people $100 an hour to argue with them about fast fashion, I also wish that people could have this experience that you've had. Even if it was just for one day, for many people, it'd be very telling. But here's the thing. Most people don't know how to sew. So it's not even a conversation we can have. They don't know how it hurts your eyes and your back and your hands and you get uncomfortable. Like they don't know that. Mm-hmm.
Your work, they assume a machine did it automatically. Like,
Yeah.
they don't even know there's a human element that was needed for that machine to operate. But it's funny you say that because it's another iteration I was thinking about, inspired by Marina Abramovich. The Artist is Present. She did back in like 2010 or something at the MoMA, where you could sit across from her. She sat in a chair for however long the museum was open each day, and you could sit across from her and see how long you could like sit and stare at her until you broke. And people were lined up for hours to sit across from her during this performance. And I'm like, oh, we could do a version like that where I have 2 sewing machines, and so I'm sewing for 14 hours and then anybody else can come up and sew for as long as they want right next to me, and like just see how you do, see how long you can last.
I love that idea.
Probably not long. And if I could get up and leave the performance, I would. But something I kept reminding myself, and it came up when these grad students came to visit, they said, you know, like what's keeping you accountable? Like, how do you choose? Why do you choose to continue to do this work, even if, you know, no one is tuned in to the live stream at this moment and no one has come in to visit you in the gallery? Like, why would you keep doing it if no one's watching? And I kept having to remind myself, like, well, I have integrity, and I told myself I was going to do this, and I chose to do this, and so I am holding myself accountable to it. And I'm the only person who is going to hold myself accountable to anything that I choose to do or choose to believe in or want to abide by or live within the confines in. Like, I am always going to be the one responsible for whether or not I actually accomplish those things. And I think that's a big part of how I approach my creative work and how I had to approach this project, because even though I had the kind of ominous presence of a live stream, it's true. There were times where no one was tuned in and no one was in the gallery watching me, but I still had to keep sewing because I said I was going to do it, and so I had to do it.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting call out too, because this was already in itself like a really brutal experience, but you didn't have like factory managers like sort of pressuring you to work faster, right? Or watching you in the same way, or harassing you, or threatening you with physical violence, or actually, you know, hitting you.
Yeah.
And even without all of that, this was still a brutal and affecting experience. which says so much. It says so much, right? You got like and this is like the Disney version of it, I guess, in comparison, but yet it was still so hard. Yeah, completely unnecessary. Once again, like this idea that like somehow this work is beneficial to society because we get all these cheap clothes is such a fallacy, because the cheap clothes don't bring us happiness either. And they actually, they create bigger problems for the planet. It's, I can't wait until people start sending me that $100, because as we're talking, I'm like coming up with all these great comebacks for those conversations. So thank you for helping me work through this exercise.
My pleasure.
If you're enjoying this episode, then this is a great time to remind you that my work here at Clotheshorse is made possible by the support of listeners like you, just like NPR, and these great small businesses. Please go give them your support. Blank Cass, or Blanket Coats by Cass, is focused on restoring, renewing, and reviving the history held within vintage and heirloom textiles. By embodying the love, craft, and energy that is original to each vintage textile as I transfer it into a new garment, I hope we can reteach ourselves to care for and mend what we have and make it last. Blank Cass lives on Instagram at _Cass, and a website will be launched soon at blankcass.com. Located in Whistler, Canada, Velvet Underground is a velvet jungle full of vintage and secondhand clothing, plants, a vegan cafe, and lots of rad products from other small sustainable businesses. Our mission is to create a brand and community dedicated to promoting self-expression, as well as educating and inspiring a more sustainable and conscious lifestyle, both for the people and the planet. Find us on Instagram at shop_Velvet Underground, or online at www.shopvelvetunderground.com. St. Evens is a New York City-based vintage shop that is dedicated to bringing you those special pieces you'll reach for again and again. More than just a store, St. Evens is dedicated to sharing the stories and history behind the garments. 10% of all sales are donated to a different charitable organization each month. New vintage is released every Thursday at wearstevens.com, with previews of new pieces and more, brought to you on Instagram at wear_st.evens. That's Wear St. Evens. Country Feedback is a mom and pop record shop in Tarboro, North Carolina. They specialize in used rock, country, and soul, and offer affordable vintage clothing and housewares. Do you have used records you want to sell? Country Feedback wants to buy them. Find us on Instagram at Country Feedback Vintage and Vinyl, or head down east and visit our brick and mortar. All are welcome at this inclusive and family-friendly record shop in the country. Republica Unicornia Yarns, handmade yarn and notions for the color obsessed, made with love and some swearing in fabulous Atlanta, Georgia by head yarn wench Kathleen. Get ready for rainbows with a side of giving a damn. Republica Unicornia is all about making your own magic using small batch, responsibly sourced, hand-dyed yarns and thoughtfully made notions. Slow fashion all the way down and discover the joy of creating your very own beautiful hand-knit, crocheted, or woven pieces. Find us on Instagram at Republica_Unicornia_yarns and at www.republicaunicornia.com. Picnic Wear, a slow fashion brand ethically made by hand from vintage and dead stock materials, most notably vintage towels. Founder Danny has worked in the industry as a fashion designer for over 10 years, but started Picnic Wear in response to her dissatisfaction with the industry's shortcomings. Picnic Wear recently moved to rural North Carolina, where all their sewing and accessories are now designed and cut, but the majority of their sewing is done by skilled garment workers in New York City. Their customers take comfort in knowing that all their sewists are paid well above New York City minimum wage. Picnic Wear offers minimal waste and maximum authenticity. Future vintage over future garbage. Cute Little Ruin is an online shop dedicated to providing quality vintage and secondhand clothing, vinyl, and home items in a wide range of styles and price points. If it's ethical and legal, we try to find a home for it. Vintage style with progressive values. Find us on Instagram at Cute Little Ruin. Is there a little bit of Italy in your soul? Are you an enthusiast of pre-loved decor and accessories? Bring vintage Italian style and history into your space with the Pewter Thimble. We source useful and beautiful things and mend them where needed. We also find gorgeous illustrations and make them print-worthy. Tarot cards, tea towels, and hand-picked treasures available to you from the comfort of your own home. Responsibly sourced from across Rome, lovingly renewed by fairly paid artists and artisans, with something for every budget. Discover more at thepewterthimble.com. Deco Denim is a startup based out of San Francisco, and it sells clothing and accessories that are sustainable, gender fluid, size inclusive, and high quality, made to last for years to come. Deco Denim is trying to change the way you think about buying clothes. Founder Sarah Mattis wants to empower people to ask important questions like, where was this made? Was this garment made ethically? Is this fabric made of plastic? Can this garment be upcycled? And if not, can it be recycled? Sign up at decodenim.com to receive $20 off your first purchase. They promise not to spam you and send out no more than 3 emails a month, with 2 of them surrounding education or a personal note from the founder. Again, that's decodenim.com. So, we've been talking for quite a while, but I wanted to just talk for a few minutes about what you actually do to make a living, because obviously this, 14 hours, not a lucrative experience for you. And when we were talking before, you said, quote, I make clothes all day, every day. And that is because that is also how you make a living, is by making clothing. How many garments have you made this year?
Counting the pieces that I created during 14 hours, which included, I think, 6 large-scale sort of tapestry works, and then 120 or so quilting squares. So I counted all of those. Like, one quilting square counted as one garment because I was doing an intricate sort of textile manipulation across the face of it. But then one tapestry that's like 5 yards of fabric, that counted as one garment. So trying to, qualify, like, there's not a good balance between like garment to garment, how much labor it takes or material it utilizes. But I think I'm at like 380 or so at this point this year. Because in January alone, I made 51 garments. And then, as I said, I made 167 for the collaboration. And then there's been a lot of other pieces in between. But my biggest year to date was 2022. I made 550 garments that year. And so I'm going to top it this year for sure.
Wow. I mean, there's only 365 days in a year. So you really are sewing clothes all day, every day.
All day, every day. And part of it is my method. Like, I'm very improvisational, and I'm very motivated by waste reduction. And so that keeps my work ever perpetual. But I design in a very exacting way. Like, I don't contemplate decisions, I just make them. And then if it turns out I made the wrong decision, that becomes a design opportunity to reinvent and reconfigure and maybe discover something new through a process of adding labor on top of my labor. But yeah, that is my day-to-day. JRAT is my brand. I make one-of-a-kind clothing from reclaimed materials through the zero waste methodology. And I usually work within the context of collections because I really curate the materials that I'm working with. And I do a lot to augment the surfaces through painting and dyeing and different textile manipulations and embellishments so that things that maybe shouldn't live together are married through that action of creative intervention. And I make wearable furniture. Being that I learned how to weave chairs, I'll weave onto a found chair frame, and then with fabric sewn together like yarn, and it's usually strips of clothing that just, maybe someone gave it to me and I didn't actually want to work with it to turn it back into a garment, and so I'll cut it into strips and sew it into yarn and weave it on a chair, and then I'll knit a sweater which gets attached to the chair, and so when you wear the sweater you wear the chair, so you're kind of obligated to stay seated, and it can be like sort of cocooning space of contemplation, but it also can be like a torture chamber of rumination depending on where you're at mentally.
Yeah.
And I also make rugs that have pants woven into it. So when you put the pants on, you put the rug on, and you're kind of set up for this like Shavasana type corpse pose posture, just lying on the ground, which is ironic because I was at the time investigating like my chronic overwork, and I'm like, let's do a really labor intensive project to create something it's built for rest that I'm not actually going to use. Like, they just sit at my studio and I put them on display at different times, but I don't actually utilize them for the benefit they might bring. But I do a series called Wall Dolls, which was my exploration into bringing my work of clothing more into a 2D sort of fine art presentation. So they're these soft sculptures that look like life-size sort of Muppet style dolls, and they're adorned with J-Rat inspired garments. And I also run a project called Wardrobe Therapy, where I work with clients' own garments that usually it's things they really love, but they don't wear for a wide variety of reasons, and yet they can't get rid of. Because I myself have this bag of clothes in my closet where I'm not ready to give you up, but I don't know what to do with you. And so that practice involves a pretty extensive interview process, so I can really understand the client's relationship to fashion, where it started, where it's at, where they want it to go. And by the end of the interview, we sort of co-design a way to reconfigure these pieces that they love into things that they can wear again and love that much more. And then I do the labor of cutting and sewing, and there's a fitting process, and I deliver the finished piece to the client when the project is completed. So that's sort of what I do day to day throughout the year. Some projects I like with J-Rat, making collections. That's what I do most day in, day out. But I'm trying to schedule going forward more time to quote unquote take a break and invest a lot of energy into something that won't make money. Like, I can sell garments, but I've never sold one of my chairs or wearable rugs or a wall doll, because I price those adequately for the time and the energy and the material that's invested in them. But I don't price my clothing adequately so that I can sell it. The balance is the things that don't make money, they get less time invested into them, but I still invest a lot of time and energy into the things that do help me earn money. I kind of undervalue myself. And I think that's another reflection of the way that garment workers across the world, their labor is undervalued. And it means that most people either are unwilling or unable to budget adequately for a garment such as what I create, and that means that my labor becomes undervalued as well. And that's something that I've had to accept and choose to live within, because I know I have a choice as to whether or not I continue to work in this way or do this kind of work. And so in some ways it feels like the sacrifice is, not to sound grandiose, but like a public service. Like wardrobe therapy, I definitely don't charge enough, but I feel like that's a public service to engage people in their relationships with clothing so that they can better understand themselves and their motivations, and start to see places where maybe they can make different choices that are more ethical, more sustainable, more respectful of garment workers and their lives. And through talking with people, I feel like I have made an impact. A lot of people have reflected back that they, started to think more about whether or not to buy fast fashion, either because they were a wardrobe therapy client or just because they've seen my work. And I really appreciate that feedback, because I try not to be like preachy about what I do, because I have made that decision in the past and I found it just didn't work for me, because I'm like not up for the challenge of having a debate online. Like,
right.
I don't have that constitution. Like, that's not what I'm good at, and people are good at it. And like, I really respect what you are doing, because like you put yourself out there in the fray and like really take on those conversations that can be like emotionally draining and like sometimes psychologically devastating.
Yeah.
I'm not always available for that.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to find the ways that I can bring this message forward in a way that's authentic and, again, sustainable for me. And so what I'm doing right now is more or less sustainable. And I've had to redefine like my personal definition of success. And being a graduate of Parsons, like, success is showing during New York Fashion Week, or becoming a great brand, a big name, like creating this sort of facade or fulfilling someone else's vision of success in fashion. And I had to abandon that and center on my own definition, which has just been creating a sustainable career in the arts and accepting sustainability as a plural word. Like, it's financial, of course, but it's also ethical, it's social, it's political, it's spiritual, it's emotional, it's physical, it's relational. Like, sustainability for me has to be an all-encompassing pursuit. And I know right now I'm only like 50-50. My business is sustainable in that I'm exclusively using reclaimed and dead stock materials. I'm resolving material issues for other people, and for larger situations that are completely outside my control, like fast fashion, to the best of my ability, I try to subvert what they're doing by creating sustainable work out of what they are making, which is inherently unsustainable. But the aspect of my business that is not sustainable is the time and the energy and the emotional drain that it takes to do what I do. But again, like, I'm making a choice. I'm willing to do it for as long as I'm willing to do it. And I think at a certain point I might have to accept that I'm not going to be willing to do this anymore. I just don't know when that is. And I know I'm not obligated to explain myself or be accountable to anybody else on that front. Like, if I want to stop doing what I'm doing tomorrow, I get to choose to do that.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's a good way to look at it, because someday you just might not want to do it anymore, and that's okay. I think often, it's like we're sort of going full circle here, because we're going back to sort of where we started our conversation with like how so many, recently, it feels like this is strictly anecdotal. Like, it has felt like so many makers, brands, designers in the slow fashion space have said like, okay, I'm done, in the past like 6-8 months. And I feel like people always show up to be like, oh, I'm so sad, or like, I can't believe you're leaving, or I wish I would have supported you, or I always planned on buying something I didn't. And I think really the best thing to show up with in those situations is like, wow, I'm going to miss you, but I'm also happy for you. Like, I know that sounds weird, but it's like, I get it. Like, people who are working in this way, they are throwing everything of themselves into it. And that isn't sustainable long term, despite the work itself, the final product being sustainable. It's so complicated, right? And as you said, like, people no longer understand how much clothing should cost. And so you are pushed into a position where you are selling clothing to people who, your customers, of course, are going to be more mindful of this, but even they don't know how much clothing really should cost. Because most of us, the last time clothes cost what they should have cost, we were probably very small children, or before we were even born, to be honest. And so we just we don't know. We don't know. And we don't know a lot of people who sew. Most of our parents didn't work in a garment factory because, it's not here anymore. And I think that means you're coming up against a lot of things that make doing what you're doing really hard, really hard. You said when we were talking before, you said, you don't see upcycling as a fad or a trend. It's a methodology. It's a new way of making stuff. And the reality is, if even fast fashion went away, what you're doing is really the way forward anyway, which is like using everything until it can no longer be used anymore. And so there is this part of me that feels that you and everyone else who is doing this kind of work, you're really pioneers of this new way forward, this new way of looking at items and their elements, their materials, and seeing that long-term value and the building and building from it and building from it until you can't anymore. And so we're in this weird time where, I don't know, it's like you're creating the future, but the present hasn't caught up with it yet. And so people don't want to pay for it. But over time, right? Like, because you're in the early stages. Over time, what you're doing in an ideal world will be how everything is done, right? And by then, people will understand that robots don't sew our clothes, that this work has value, and that no one should be exploited to make clothing. And in time, because there used to be a time where sewing clothing, making clothing for people was a good, solid middle-class living. Like, let's get back to that. I mean, what you're doing is important.
To reconfigure things that already exist and turning them into new and different forms. Like it's what I enjoyed doing in junior high. Like my parents let me cut my clothes up and sew them back together in different ways. And I don't want to be doing anything else. So I feel spoiled that I get to do what I do. And I get to contribute in a positive way to a really problematic situation that I have the privilege of validating these things that already exist and allowing them to persist in a way that is that much more acceptable or like engaging.
Yeah.
As opposed to just letting them like languish and die in a thrift store or a landfill or a pile of clothing on fire in the desert. Like I really do enjoy what I do and I want to keep doing it. And my studio at this moment, my studio at this moment is like vomiting out material left and right. Like I am drowning in material in this moment. And so what I think about most of the day is how I want to resolve all of this material. Like that's really what I want to do. I want to make and make and make and make and make and make and make until I can't make anymore. And I know there really will never be that moment. Like there will always be material available. So there will never be a moment that I can stop unless I choose to, because there's just always going to be this problem to resolve. Living in a world where the next 6 generations have clothing, like it already exists. We don't have to keep making clothing. It feels like a real privilege to do the work that I do. So I am very grateful.
Well, I'm really grateful for your work, and I can't wait for everybody to hear about what you do and get to know you, because as hard as I know it is, I'm just so grateful that there are people out there really, being the pioneers in this space. Like I said, like this is like the first generation where we've really like had to start thinking about this way and think creatively and change these processes going forward. And like, hopefully things get easier. I guess it's like what I think. I'm like, am I going to be like 80 years old fighting with people for $100 an hour on the internet about why we don't need cheap clothes from Shein? Fingers crossed, no, right? Like we're getting there. I hope by then I've like raised my arguing with me on the internet rate. But like I think that like we are in the it's like, I don't know. I was like in the time that we're living in right now to what I consider personally one of the worst periods of human life, which is like 7th grade, where it's just like you're going through puberty. Everyone's mean at school. You're like neither a child nor an adult. You're not even a teenager. You're just like in this weird, difficult time where you're learning how to move forward and everything is hard. And I feel like that's where we are in terms of like fighting climate change and dismantling fast fashion and just setting ourselves up for this like better future. You know, and the things I listed are just like a few things on the list of things that we are like trying to exist within right now and improve and make, you know, all part of making the world like a healthier, more just place for everyone. And I like to think that like, even though it's really hard and the work is hard and it's tiring, that there are so many of us who are so passionate about it that we are setting the stage for things to be better going forward. So that's the hope that gets me up every day and keeps me going.
So thank you.
I have to have this talk with myself all the time. So I'm getting good at giving it to others.
It's like,
yeah.
We can turn the ship.
Yeah, I really believe that we can, because if you look back historically, people have made major changes in the way the world functions. Sometimes for the worse, you know, like fast fashion being a great example, but often for the better. And so we just need to remember that the early stages of all of those movements, they were hard for everyone involved. But they got to look back, hopefully, and see their progress. And I see that for all of us. Well, I want to thank you, Janelle. This was like so much fun. Like I could talk about this for 6 more hours. So you definitely have to come back again so we could talk about it more. Do you have any final thoughts or just anything else you'd like to say before we end our conversation?
I mean, I just like thank you for the opportunity to share some of my story and to share this particular project and various aspects involved in it. I really appreciate being included in your platform and being able to support the work that you're doing through the work that I'm doing. And I think of what you just said, what I really felt like inspired by was that, you know, that sort of like broader systemic change, it really takes each individual making their own choices and their own commitments as much as it's about like this collective movement towards manifesting a different future based on how dissatisfied we are with the present. And so I just love to see that you are doing the work that's most authentic to you through this podcast, and I'm doing the work that's most authentic to me through my creative work, through fashion, through performance art. And it takes all of that. Like we can't all be out here doing the exact same thing trying to make a change. Like it takes all different perspectives and actions and methods and approaches. And so I'm really grateful to be included in what you're doing. So thank you.
Well, thank you. I think there's no one way to do this work. And honestly, it is all of the different ways that we do it that resonates with different people and brings more people in. Because like you said, each person has a role to play in this. That's the other thing that I'm totally willing to argue with people about, but maybe for $150 an hour, which is why you have to be a part of this, and that like no matter how big Amazon is, you still matter too. So
right. I know that. Yeah, I mean, this is a whole nother conversation. the idea that some people are exempt from the issues of fashion. And my first thought is always like, oh, I didn't know you were a nudist. Like,
oh my, don't get me started. Because like, you know, we've been working on all of this lobbyist work for the Fashion Act. And sometimes we'll go into meetings with like, you know, legislators, right? And they'll be like, well, I'm not really into fashion. They sort of dismiss what we're talking about. And it's like, I couldn't help but notice that you're wearing clothing today. Yeah, so you actually are a part of this, which I think is really important to you. I mean, I've been saying forever, like, maybe it's the word fashion that makes people not take it seriously, but I can't think of a better word because, like, fast clothes. Well, first off, for me as a person with like speech issues, that's like a really hard one for me. I'd have to practice it a lot. Fast clothing. It's still, I don't know. It's the fast fashion. It's the alliteration there, you know? So anyway, I'm always open to more suggestions, but I think the F and the F really like drive it home. I want to thank Janelle for getting up super early to record this interview. We started at 6 a.m. Pacific time, and I thought it was so early at 9 a.m. Eastern. I also want to thank her for sharing so many thoughtful ideas and facts. I really, really enjoyed this conversation. I hope you did as well, too. I'm obsessed with the idea of Janelle doing 14 hours outside the Shein warehouse, and I spent the last few days thinking about how we as a community can help her make that happen. So stay tuned as I think about that more. But please, in the meantime, do yourself a favor and check out all of Janelle's art and all of her work on her website, which I'll be sharing in the show notes, along with some information about the zero waste methodology for making clothing. We just didn't have time to get to everything. There was a lot to talk about. The last thing I'll say to you after this very long episode is this. As Janelle said, we all play different roles in terms of dismantling fast fashion and creating a better future. Some of us are literally upcycling fabrics. Others are educating via events, classes, content, like this podcast, art. Others are teaching people how to sew and mend and thrift, all those things. And this is just the beginning of what we can all do, because there is a virtually infinite list of the ways in which this work, this important work, can manifest itself, and it's all super important and valuable. I've been thinking a lot about how I want to get the Clotheshorse Jamboree started, and here's how I think I want to do it. I want to ask everyone the question: if money and time were no object, if you could get exactly what you need to pull it off, what would you do to dismantle fast fashion and create a better future? This is a world in which you get paid to do that work. You have all the resources you need to get it done, which is like, help, support, materials, you name it. What would it be? What would you do? I guess it's sort of like a slow fashion movement, like dream exercise. For me, I would travel around teaching other people about how to talk to others about slow fashion. And at the same time, I would get to talk to people who have never heard this information before. I think for me, connecting with others, sharing what I know, engaging them in conversation, getting them excited about all of this, or angry, or sick about it. I've had all those feelings too. It's part of the process. For me, getting people inspired to go start these conversations themselves, it at times it feels like my dream job and my life's work all rolled into one. What would your answer to that question be? What would you do if you had all of the resources? You don't have to have an answer right now, but it's something for you to ruminate over for the next few weeks. If you do have an answer that you've really thought through, send it my way. I'd love to share those ideas with the rest of our community. We don't get enough time to dream because, capitalism, fear, stress, obligations, all the other things, right? And we especially don't get a chance to dream when we're talking about something as big and scary and grim, infuriating as fast fashion, as fast everything. We don't get a lot of time to dream in that space because it's hard to dream when things are that dark, right? So I would encourage you to take that time to dream over the next few weeks. I'm going to be doing that too. And I think it's something that we all need. Well, that's all for this week. As I said, I will not be back next week because it's Mr. Justin Travis White's birthday. But I will be back the week after that. Thanks for listening to another episode of Clotheshorse. Written, researched, edited, hosted, all the things by me, Amanda Lee McCarty. You know what I'm going to say. If you like it, leave a rating, leave a review, subscribe, but most importantly, tell your friends. This is all about community, and how we build community is by getting other people involved. If you'd like to support my work financially, which I would greatly appreciate, you can learn more at patreon.com/clotheshorse-podcast, or you can go to my website and use Ko-fi to make a one-time donation. There are other ways you can support me that you can learn about in my Instagram bio. Yeah, that's all I have for you this week. Buy your Jamboree tickets. If you see Dustin Travis White out there in the world, wish him a happy birthday. But I will say thank you, as always, Mr. Justin Travis White, for our music and audio support. See you on a couple weeks. Bye.